Farmers today are facing rising costs, volatile markets, and extreme weather. The A Better Way to Farm podcast digs into strategies to help you take control of farm inputs and maximize profit so your farm can thrive for generations. Remember to take advantage of our free resources at abetterwaytofarm.com. Now, from America's Heartland, here's your host.
Hey guys, happy holidays, Merry Christmas. Rod here to Better Way to Farm, where our goal is to increase yields and improve profits for the American farmer. Today we're going to kick off the 12 days of nutrients, and I'm going to get into nitrogen here in a little bit, but let's talk just a little bit about what we are going to look at, what we're going to do here. One of the things that I want to discuss as we go into this is Mulder's Ball. I'm sure that all of you are familiar with it, but it's just this chart that is available a lot of places. You can Google it and find it. But looking here, talking about how all of the different nutrients interact with other nutrients. And the fact of the matter is, that's what we're after, saying how do these interact? Because oftentimes within our industry, what we do is we just focus on one thing. And I see consultants who their one thing is calcium, and calcium's important. And I get that. And I see guys who, man, it's nitrogen. It's all about the nitrogen. Put on more nitrogen. That's going to cure everything that's wrong. That's how we're going to run to the moon with 600 bushel corn. And guys, it's not that simple. If it was, everyone would be growing 400, 500, 600 bushel corn consistently. Putting more on is not the answer. And that's in regard to any nutrient. It's about putting on the right amount, the right time, the right place with the right source. The 4 R's are critical. Let me say this as we start out here today. I went with the flannel shirt. We will be doing Christmas sweaters, Christmas shirts, all things Christmas, and you can look forward to that. Guys, I want to tell you that this is not the authoritarian end-all to end-all about all of the different nutrients as we launch off into this 12-day study. The fact of the matter is, our goal is to make people think. Our goal is to teach people to ask questions. Our goal is to say, hey, is there something different that I could do here? Is there something better that could make this work for me? And I want to say this, and it's really important that you understand. I'm not here to start an argument. The politics season just ended. And the one thing that I figured out was no one woke up that morning and said, if somebody will just scream at me on social media or will tell me that I'm really stupid on social media, I will switch my political views. I will go from the left to the right or from the right to the left. I will move from Republican to Democrat or Democrat to Republican. That's not how that works. Most of the time we make people dig in their heels. So I want to be crystal clear. That's not my goal here. I'm going to talk a little bit about anhydrous. I have an open bias against it. I'm very upfront with that. I'm going to get into why here in a little bit and talk about that. And I know there are a ton of you out there who are anhydrous users. And let me say that we work with a lot of guys who do use anhydrous. And so, to some degree, life is about smorgasbords, and you go through and you pick what you want, and you choose that which you think will work the best for you, and I get all those things. I am going to ask you just to think, okay? I'm not here trying to change your mind. I'm just here going to share some information with you. As we get started, you have to know that there are a ton of resources that I use. The Fertility Handbook put out by the Fertilizer Institute, From the Soil Up by Don Schrieffer. My standard go-to, the Midwest Labs Agronomy Handbook. Guys, that thing is an easy read and worth its weight in gold. Life and Energy by Arden Anderson. The Western Fertilizer Handbook. And for today, the last one will be Kinsey's Hands-On Agronomy. So that's a list of resources that we are utilizing, among other things. We try to read, we try to take in a tremendous amount of information in order that we can try to bring you new things to think about. And I believe the learning curve in agriculture, guys, is just getting ready to ramp up. I'm super excited about it. I know we've learned a lot, but I really look the next 20 years to be very exciting as we start looking at what micronutrients do and the interactions they have with microbiology in the soil and all of the different things and how they play together. I think it's going to be really, really fun as we go here. Let me say also that I am aware I'm talking to a lot of farmers. We have never had the number of people reach out to us and say, hey, we'd like a free consultation. And you can do that. Guys, there's a lot of uncertainty right now in the marketplace, and I get that, and I understand the reason for it. I talked at church this morning, and oftentimes we hear the phrase, something has to change. Well, typically what has to change for me to make a difference in life is me. I found out that when I will change me, then I can have an impact and do some other things, and maybe we should all respectfully consider that. One of the things that's interesting as I actually dive into the nitrogen part of this is the fact that 78% of the atmosphere of the earth is nitrogen. There's a lot. I'd say there's just a ton of nitrogen, but that's not true. There's actually 34,000 tons of nitrogen in the atmosphere above 1 acre of ground. So every time you have an acre, if you take it all the way up to the atmosphere ends, there's 34,000 tons there. And just to equate that into pounds, that's 68 million pounds of nitrogen that are in the atmosphere, which leads me to say this. We don't need any more nitrogen gassing off. We don't need to put any more nitrogen in the atmosphere. It's well covered. Just to contrast that, making sure that you're aware, 78% of the atmosphere is nitrogen. 0.04%, 4/100ths of 1% of the atmosphere is CO2. That's just a little thing for you to think about as you're going through and listening to all the people talk about all of that. So as we dive in here, I want to do some resource stuff. I'm going to talk about some studies and some different things here, but first I want to start just with some of my resources and quote some of the people who I have a tremendous amount of respect for, like Don Schrieffer. And as I dive into his book here on page 205, and I start grabbing some of the things that are super relevant to us, just in some of this, guys, I'm going to talk about a certain nutrient on each day, but they always interact with others, and there's things that we can learn that make a really big difference. For instance, one of the things that's really important is to know that fertilizer burn is caused by plasmosis. That's the opposite of osmosis. In other words, the high salt that cause these nutrients and water to seep out of the roots and into the surrounding soil. They literally draw moisture from the plant into the soil. And that's going to cause damage, anything from slight retardation of growth to complete dehydration and possible death of the roots in the plant. And so over-applying anything typically is going to get us into trouble, and it's going to create a great deal of stress in our life. I'm going to talk about a study here later that I ran across actually on TikTok, and it talked about this. Nitrogen is a growth element. It is necessary for growth, beyond the shadow of a doubt. But an excess of nitrogen causes excessive vegetative growth. And excessive vegetative growth can create deficiencies in other nutrients. In other words, we have too much nitrogen at the expense of something else. And that will set the stage for disease. That will set the stage for insects. That will set the stage for reduced yields. And so we know that the overuse of N can actually result in a decrease in yield, and that is not what we're after. We know that the conversion from ammonium to nitrite is brought about by the nitrosomonas bacteria, and we know that that nitrite is then converted by the nitrobacter bacteria to nitrate, which is negatively charged. In other words, nitrogen starts out as a cation with a plus charge, and then what happens is it ends up as an anion with a negative charge. And so when we end up with that negative charge, why does that work against us? Well, quite simply, because we know that the ground is the largest negatively charged thing in the world. That's why electricians call the dirt the ground, because it has a negative charge. And so when we have a negatively charged nutrient on a negatively charged soil colloid, what happens? It repels. And when we get it repelled, it sloughs off into the groundwater. And when that happens, then all of a sudden we're experiencing loss, and sometimes even great amounts of loss. As Donald writes here in his book, we strongly believe the triad of nitrogen, phosphorus, and zinc will always be better in combination than when used singularly. Again, what are we talking about? We're just saying, hey, we know that just putting all one nutrient, all our eggs in that one basket, is not going to work for us. We're going to get clobbered pretty bad. And so we want to make sure we're doing that. There are other things that go with it too. That triad is fantastic, but it is in of itself is not enough. And we have to make sure that we're doing everything the soil test calls for, nothing more and nothing less. As we start looking at Neil's book, Hands-on Agronomy, I dive in here and I go to page 73, and I'm not even coming close, guys. I want to encourage you. All of these things are a great resource. All of these things will make you have more knowledge. All of these things will help you to be a better farmer. The fact of the matter is, we got to learn. School's never out, and we know that. As we start taking a look at all of the different things that are important in here, he gets to talking about what excesses of different things will do. And when we have an excess, we're going to end up with a yield decrease. And on page 229, as he starts talking about the relationship between sulfur, and the bottom line is that overuse of nitrogen will burn out the humus supply, and equally it will destroy the sulfur storage system. Ladies and gentlemen, we have seen the need for sulfur take off like a rocket ship. Now, there's a lot of reasons for that. I'm going to get into sulfur. But one of the reasons is, I'll do that on another day, but one of the reasons is we've burnt out the ability of our soil to hold it. And when we lose that ability to hang on to the sulfur, then we have to come in and reapply on a regular basis. We're going to do that over and over and over again. When we take a look at the agronomy handbook coming from Midwest Labs, guys, get this. You can download it for free, print it off, and punch holes in it, and put it in a 3-ring binder on your own, or you can buy it for like less than $10. And I want to tell you, I think it's a good $10 spent. It makes for some good reading to help us be more efficient in what we do. Now, Midwest says, instead of saying there's 34,000 tons, they say there's 35,000 tons, which would mean there's 70 million pounds, but we're not going to argue over 68 million or 70 million pounds of a nitrogen. There's just a lot, and we know that that's above each and every acre of ground, but it's just another resource saying the same thing. And guys, you can use Dr. Google and come up with the amount that's there over and over and over again, and there's always plenty of people who will agree. There is a lot of N in the atmosphere. One of their conclusions that they drew in here says excess nitrogen in relation to the balance of other plant food elements can cause many failures, such as lodging, low-quality grains, low-quality forages, low-quality fruits, and low-quality vegetables. It will also decrease disease resistance, and it will delay the maturity of the crops. Deficiency of nitrogen will cut yield, and it will cut growth, and it will cut quality, but so will excess. And when we end up with that excess, it always comes back to bite us, and the worst part is we paid to do it. We're spending the money to spend big money in order to cut our own throats and reduce our yields. I have a study here that my good friend Kurt from over at Geneseo, Illinois, sent to me a couple of 3 years ago, and I found it very, very interesting. And what it does is it shows the average daily temperatures in Fargo, North Dakota, and Davenport, Iowa. He lives pretty close to Davenport. And let me say this, Davenport basically, between the 1st of October and the 1st of November, even down to the 20th of November, Davenport, Iowa will run about 5 degrees warmer than Fargo. I would have thought it would be more than that, but it's saying on the average it's about 5 degrees. And what they said was that nitrogen that was applied October the 1st, when the average high was 63.6 and the average low was 43.9, 75% loss could be expected. You say, okay, well, we'll wait till October 15th. It's cooler. It's only getting up to about 56 of a day, and it's dropping down all the way to 35 at night. You're still expecting about a 50% loss of nitrogen. Say, okay, let's go to November 1st. What happens? We do significantly reduce our loss. The average temperature high was 46. The average low was 28.4. And at that point, they were only experiencing about a 20% loss of nitrogen. And so, guys, fall applied gas is going to experience loss. And I get people, again, it's what you do. I'm okay with that. I'm not here to have an argument. What my bias? Why? All right, look up anhydrous accident, Teotopolis, Illinois, when a semi-truck wrecked. Not his fault. I understand that, but a semi-truck wrecked, and 5 people lost their lives. One was a father who was home with his sons, and he heard the ruckus, and when he opened his front door, the anhydrous came through and killed him and his kids. Guys, I have a bias. I don't think that you can save enough money to justify those lives. When I was 12 years old, I had a neighbor who went blind because of an anhydrous accident. That scarred me for life. I had my own incident at age 19 when I was applying anhydrous here on this very farm, and something went sideways, and only by the grace of God was I able to get away. I have a video that my good friend Jared from out in Nebraska sent me that showed what happened when a breakaway didn't work, and it shows the anhydrous whipping around. You reach out, we'll send you that video if you'd like to see it. And the kicker was Jared said that 3 years after that, that ground still wouldn't grow anything. That hose just went round and round and around that applicator. Applicator come unhooked, breakaway didn't work, hose busted, a whole tank of gas blew off right there, and that ground was basically sterilized. I have a new friend, a client that just started with us this year, and he experienced a death in the family due to anhydrous. And guys, for all those reasons, I'm out. If you watch Shark Tank, that's it. I'll be Lori and I'll give you a lengthy explanation, and then I'm going to tell you that I'm out. However, if you are going to use it, I would like you to have your eyes wide open. One of the things that I hear sometimes is, well, we know we're going to experience loss. We waited till November 1st in Fargo or whatever here. There's a lot of gas going on right now here. So what we're going to do is we're going to put on an extra 20% because it's so cheap that it's okay. Let's talk money. Let's just be realistic and talk dollars here. Right now, I talked to Kurt this afternoon, and he told me that he could buy 32 for 48 cents per pound, the actual pound of nitrogen. And NH3 at our local retailer here is 44 cents, so it is 4 cents a pound cheaper. However, if you put on 150 pounds of NH3, that's going to run you $66. And if you put on 150 pounds of 32%, that's going to run you $72. So there is a $6 savings there. But if you go and you put on the extra 20%, now all of a sudden that 180 pounds, because you're trying to offset for that loss, is $79.20, which is $7.20 higher than the 150. Now I get, you're going to say, well, I got to get it done in the fall. I got to, guys, here's my deal. When people get to talk to me about we got to put that gas on in the fall, we got to get it done because there's a lot to do in the spring, then I just sometimes will say, hey, why don't you go ahead and plant part of your corn? You go ahead and plant 300 or 400 acres, a couple thousand acres, get it done, get it in the ground. We got crap to do. It's over with. Let's be done. And you look at me and you say, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. You are correct. But what you're saying is there is time to do what you need to do in the spring. We have to figure it out. When we get to talking about nitrogen loss, let's roll out of the fall applied gas and just talk about, because we know we experience loss of nitrogen with no matter what form we use. I've talked to multiple growers. When we start talking about this loss, we say, how are we going to fix that? Well, if we embrace the 4 R's, right product, right place, right time, right source, that helps. And then we have to come back and say, what does that look like? Because guys, I am very much, my experience is one size fits all is not true. One size fits one, and that's it. The fact of the matter is, we get people who say, well, I'm going to put my nitrogen on, I'm going to put a little bit on pre-plant, I'm going to wide drop some on, or I'm going to put on a colder, and then I'm going to run it through my pivot 3, 4, 5 times. That's fantastic if you're in that situation. You live where I live, and it's all point rows and terraces, and you're out there making multiple trips. We don't have an irrigator. There is no irrigation in this part of the world. And so all of a sudden now we've got to take a look at something different. Our own personal farm, we put some on pre-plant, making sure we have enough to carry us all the way to V6 or V8, and we come in there and we wide drop the balance of it with a one-trip deal. Why? Because we're going to smash a lot of corn, and we don't want to be making more than one trip there. Some people, they say, I've got to put all my nitrogen on up front. I'm on hill ground with terraces, and I got one boom that's 22 feet in the air, and I got one boom dragging in the dirt, and that isn't going to work to get out there. So then what we're going to do, we're going to do a chemical side dress. We're going to stabilize that nitrogen with something that makes that release slow down, which segues me into, let's talk about different kinds of stabilizers. There are 15 to 20 for sale right now. If you look at their own data, only 3 of them work consistently. And I always encourage everybody, I'm not here to ask you to use anybody's seed corn. I don't care. I got a Pioneer cup right there that holds pencils. I've got the Beck's book in my drawer, but I will say this about the Beck's company. The research that they're doing gives you a lot to think about, a lot to study, and a lot to look at. I want to encourage you to do that. But on this, in regards to these stabilizers, there are 3 that we have found that work consistently. 2 of them are actually an indiscriminate bactericide. They kill everything in the soil, and therefore the bacteria die off, so the nitrosonomas cannot make that conversion, and we don't end up with a nitrate product that ends up in the groundwater near as fast. And they say, well, the bacteria comes back. They do. The problem is, how do I know that all of the bacteria that I need are coming back in the right ratios at the right time? There's another product, DCD, that we have that we are very excited about, because all it does is it blocks an enzyme for nitrosonomus bacteria. It kills nothing. It just puts them to sleep for just a little bit for 30 days. And so that loss is delayed. That's how we get that chemical side dress, if you will. And all of a sudden, we don't have to worry about having all that loss take place. And so we encourage that. We also have a product that can be applied with NH3 as a stabilizer. It works very, very well if you're prone to doing that. Different studies that I have looked at, depending on which one it is, somewhere between 60 and 80 pounds of gas is where they say the threshold is that we start to get a adverse effect on soil microbiology. And I'm not going to argue over the 60 or the 80. The point being, it's somewhere in that neighborhood, and it's relatively low. I also know that there is a study that was being ballyhooed around here, I don't know, in the last 18 months. We sat around and joked about it some evenings when we were at the fundamentals of agronomy, because what they did was they went out and they said, look, we applied anhydrous here, and there was zero effect on the soil bacteria. And they were telling the truth. They applied anhydrous, and there was zero effect on the soil biology. What they didn't bother to mention that you had to read was they applied 10 pounds of anhydrous. Well, if you put on only 10 pounds, you don't suffer any loss. I'm going to suggest you probably are not going to grow a very good crop next year if you only use 10 pounds of anhydrous in the fall. And so there's a lot of ways that people try to market and things. And guys, I just want to encourage you, read the studies, really dig into them, and really read them and get into them and see what it is that's going on. What is it that's happening with these? When you look at these studies that these companies, even with their own data, will put out, and they'll tell you that it doesn't work. Now, they'll have some flowery chart and make it look good, but it doesn't even pay for itself. Guys, we know you've got to get a minimum of a $3 return on anything that you buy, or it has to be a replacement for something else that's giving a better return than what you were originally purchasing. As we start looking at this, and we get into it later, I'm going to talk a lot about interactions and how too much nitrogen hurts you in this realm, that realm, whatever. But we've already talked about the fact that too much nitrogen is going to mess up your corn crop. It's going to mess up your bean crop. It's going to make too much vegetative growth. And it's going to cut quality. It's going to increase your disease problems, and it's going to decrease your yield. And that leads me to the last one, and I'm going to ask Karen. I sent her a study. It's not a research done at a university. However, I want to tell you that I'm very excited about it. It's a lady talking about that she just wanted to do some studies, so they applied their anhydrous at an angle, and then they planted crossways, so to speak, like at a 45-degree angle to the way they applied their anhydrous. And so she went out and she said, and I want you guys to watch the video. It's available on TikTok. You can go get it. But she talked about the fact that every place where the row intersected where they applied the anhydrous, the corn was darker green. It looked better. It was taller. It tended to be one leaf ahead in the V stages when the stuff in the middle of the row in between the anhydrous applications was at V5. The other stuff was at V6 where it was right on top of it. And so she watched this all year long. And when the time come to do harvest, she went out and hand harvested and checked it. And guys, this is where it gets sideways, because sometimes we think we saw something with our own eyes and we are convinced it's going to do this. And the reality was the corn that wasn't right on top of the application lines was 20 bushel better. And then she goes on to talk about she ran it, she didn't believe it, she ran it in other fields, she went and did others, and it was always less. Okay? Too much nitrogen equaled a yield decrease. And she talked about the fact that she's going to run it again. She has a hard time believing it. Some of the comments were really ugly, because people get into that whole deal. Everybody knows, everybody knew the world was flat in 1491. And yet here we are with a round earth. And the fact of the matter is, whatever one thinks they know, sometimes we got to be willing to question that. We've got to be able to say, is this actually true? Or is this just something that has become accepted because we've been told over and over and over again? Guys, the number of growers that I've spoken to in the last 3 weeks who have called and said we are putting on somewhere between 1.2 and 1.3 pounds of nitrogen to get a bushel of corn is a lot. A lot. And the number of growers that we work with personally who are growing corn on 0.6 pounds to 0.7 pounds, that's also a lot. And obviously the difference between if I can come in here and I can help someone cut their nitrogen use from 1.3 down to 0.65, which would be half, and all of a sudden that 0.6 of a pound, which is costing somewhere in the neighborhood of about 25 cents, 25 to 28 cents per bushel. That's the difference. If we're going to be able to stay in this game, when we say something has to change, what if we can take a quarter per bushel off of our production cost just by managing our nitrogen better? Because I think you can do that. I believe in my heart that there's room for all of us to get better. And if we can come in here and we can shave a quarter off of that, and we can shave another quarter off somewhere else, and another quarter somewhere else, all of a sudden we've driven down our cost of production 75 cents. You know, on our podcast, we had the agronomist from University of Illinois, and he talked about the fact that last year, the average cost of production for a bushel of corn in the state of Illinois was $4.52. Guys, that's not sustainable. But all you got to do is figure out how to take 75 cents off of that, and boom, all of a sudden, we're back in the game. We're able to do something here and make some money. And guys, that's going to be our theme as we go through these 12 days of nutrients, and they're not going to drop consecutively. I don't want you to think about that. Some days there will be 2, maybe 3. Some days there won't be any for 2 or 3 days in a row. I'm going to be traveling a lot. So guys, I appreciate you taking the time. I hope you love Christmas as much as I do. I hope you guys are getting ready for the Christmas season and all that it means. And I hope that you're fired up and looking forward to these next 11 drops as we put out these different nutrients as we celebrate Christmas and we celebrate the 12 days of nutrients. Thank you guys for tuning in. Thank you for being a part of what we do, letting us be a part of your lives. And we really do hope you're having a better day.